If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, night owls, cemetery workers, etc. What's the spookiest or creepiest thing you've ever seen at work? I live in a fairly rural town and occasionally pet sit for some friends when they're out of town. Their house is far enough on the edge of town that there are big open cow pastures on 3 sides of their property, and beyond those, it's just like fields and woods, so they get their fair share of local wildlife. And let me tell you that nothing makes you think twice about taking the dog out to pee before you go to bed like listening to a pack of coyotes yip and howl so close to your window that it sounds like they're basically on the back porch. I was visiting my grandparents, who live up in the mountains of California. Now, this is weed central, and almost everyone grows, so people often try to steal weed from people in the area. In response, everyone, including non-growers, puts up trail cameras and motion sensor lights. My grandparents were no exception. Now, the house is just a double-wide trailer, so visitors sleep out in a camper trailer, big enough to sleep in but not much else. So the night this went down, that's where I was sleeping. For whatever reason that night, I couldn't sleep, so I stayed up reading a book. Every now and then a light would pop on, so I'd look out to check. Mostly raccoons, jackrabbits, and the like. Occasional fox. Eventually a light popped on, and it was not a small critter. Big black shape about 20 feet from the trailer. At first, I assumed it was Grumpy, a black bear that lives in the area, until it got closer to the light. I realized it walked on 2 legs with a human-like stride, so definitely not a bear. Kind of stocky, and it was walking slowly. This matched my grandpa, along with the direction it was heading, from their house to a shed, so I figured grandpa was just checking a generator. Until it walked by the light and got next to the boat. And then I noticed. It was totally covered in black fur. Its head was at least level with the top of the boat it was next to. Which was over 10 feet off the ground. That probably took 10 years off my life. Never in my life has anything scared me as bad as realizing that the thing was not my grandpa and that it was really big. To this day, I don't know what the hell I saw, but I hope to never see it again. One night, my friend and I were walking back to his place after a concert. It was pretty late, and we decided to take a shortcut through a construction site because we were tired from the show. Since all the streets around the construction site were closed, it was completely empty, as if the whole area was abandoned like in a zombie apocalypse, with just the 2 of us in the South Loop area of Chicago. We're crossing this small bridge and just chatting away about the concert. I was looking at him and then turned my head forward and was face to face with what looked like a zombie rat. Someone had taken a mummified rat, squirrel, or something and used wire to position it like it was pouncing midair at your face. Scared the duck out of me. The combination of the abandoned construction site and the zombie rat creeped both of us out, so we ran until we hit a busy street with some traffic. I was camping next to a river deep in the mountains that was also a gold claim. My father's friend owned it and had my dad take me and my little brother camping there. It was very warm that time of year, so we didn't even use tents. Just a large picnic blanket on the ground with our sleeping bags on top. I've always been able to pick up on things, and if anything unexplainable or paranormal happens, it's typically when I'm around. For example, the wiring to the light in my living room ceiling fan is completely disconnected, but that light will randomly turn on only when I'm around. It literally will not turn off until I leave or if I kindly ask it to turn off. Anyway, I was getting really weird vibes at this gold mine. I kept having dreams every night about drowning with my father in the water and me trying to help but ultimately failing. Until one night, I just couldn't sleep. I was tending the fire to keep myself occupied when I noticed my little brother get up out of his sleeping bag and start walking towards me. Once he got close enough, I noticed he was sleepwalking. My little brother has never sleepwalked before, so I thought it was kind of odd. Especially odd when I started walking towards the river. I tried to redirect him to the sleeping bag, but he was an unstoppable force. I was probably more than double his weight at the time, and the force with which he walked pushed me out of the way even when I firmly planted my feet. He was between 5 and 10 yards from the river when I got my dad up. He rushed over to my little brother, just a few feet from the water, and as soon as he touched him, he snapped out of it and went back to his sleeping bag. My dad stayed up with me for a bit at the fire, and I told him how forcefully he was walking. My dad said he felt how strong he was walking, even in the split second he touched him. He was probably 50 pounds at the time, and he effortlessly pushed me. After about 10 minutes of talking with my dad, we both got extremely tired and went back to sleep. The nightmare of drowning with my father trying to save me but failing ended that night. The weird vibes were still there, but not as strong. My little brother doesn't remember this at all. I was working at a middle school as a night shift custodian. I cleaned a long U-shaped wing full of classrooms every weeknight. I'd already locked up one set of doors to the wing and was about to lock up the ones at the other end of the U. I made the full lap around the wing, and I'd been cleaning there all night alone, and I came to the end of the hallway where the doors to the rest of the school were. When I shut the lights off, the dark silhouette of what looked like a child ran from across the end of the hallway from left to right. There were doors down there, but I'd just locked them all up, and no one was around. I was so creeped out that I locked the doors connecting the wing to the rest of the school and ran to my car. I always felt like I was seeing things out of the corner of my eye while working there at night, but that was the most visible thing I saw at that place. I am part Native American, and I heard the classical taps on your window. They will try anything to get into your house, so keep everything locked up and have your blinds or curtains drawn. And it got really quiet. The cat that sleeps outside heard something outside my window, so I knew he heard it too. I grab my bat and peer around the corner of rooms where there are windows to see if it's a burglar. After I checked everywhere, I didn't see anyone around our house, which relieved me a bit. I flipped on the yard light and stepped outside, and the air was too quiet. That's when I see something really tall, like 10 to 12 feet, floating really fast past some trees in the woods across from my house back into the darkness. I froze for a moment, knowing exactly what the duck it was, and I remembered I should keep quiet because they are drawn in by sound. Then went back inside and locked everything. People always try to argue with me over it, saying my stories are fake and such. I was walking down Tokyo streets for a little walk, and it was around 3 o'clock in the morning, but I stepped in an alleyway to take a phone call, and what I saw scared me for life. There was a woman wearing a medical mask. If you know any Japanese urban legends, you'll be able to see where this is going. I'll type the conversation down below. Hello? Are you okay? Am I pretty? She asked me multiple times if I was pretty, so I said yes, as I thought it was some woman pulling a prank, but she pulled down her mask, and there were slits on both sides of my mouth, almost running up to her eyes. She asked me if she was pretty now. I was lucky that I love Japanese urban legends, otherwise, I don't know what would have happened. I said she was normal, then I threw some candy at her and ran away. Even if it wasn't Kuchisei Kona, I wasn't taking the chance that it was really her. When I got home, I locked the doors, and I still do today. It scared me for life. Used to clean a church alone late at night. There was a piano upstairs, which I thought was broken, which was why it was upstairs in the attic. One night I started hearing piano music from the attic. I immediately assumed someone was up there pranking me, so I went up, and there was no one. When I turned around to walk away after realizing no one was there, I heard a loud bang behind this metal door, which I assume was an attic closet. Never worked the night shift again. Asked by the one other person who worked night shifts, she confirmed that the weird stuff happening was normal. I grew up and lived in a rural town in the southwest that was surrounded by reservations. The first was when a few friends and I went to party on the reservation. The place we went to was a friend's family's land in the middle of nowhere. The house was pretty much just 4 walls and a roof, no running water, no electricity. It was the middle of December, and the area I'm from doesn't get a lot of snow, but it gets bitterly cold, and all we had to keep warm was an old wood-burning stove in the house. Well, we got to partying, and me and another friend drank a little bit. We were mostly just enjoying getting high. Everyone else gets blackout drunk and passes out. The whole time we've had a fire going in this stove, and so far it's been fine. All of a sudden, we notice that our passed out friends are coughing. We stand up and notice that the whole house is filled with smoke. I'm not sure if maybe the flute wasn't open all the way, or maybe the chimney pipe needed to be cleaned, or what. So we open the front door to air it out so we won't suffocate. So me and this friend are just chilling for maybe an hour with the door open, listening to music, and smoking weed. Now I'm not superstitious, not even a little stitious, but on the reservation there are stories about skinwalkers, and a lot of my friends believed in them. As my buddy and I are sitting there is scratching on the outside wall in the room behind us. The scratching continues all the way around the rectangular house. As it rounds the corner to the side the door is on, the pace of the scratches gets faster, as if whatever it is has started moving faster. As it gets within a foot of the door, my friend jumps up, runs over to the door, and kicks it closed. I've jumped up to find anything to fight this thing off with if it were to get in. As my buddy latches the lock, the scratching is at the door, and it lasts for maybe 45 minutes before just stopping. I'm a logic-minded person, so I'm not sure what was causing it. At the time, my adrenaline was pumping and fight or flight took over, so I didn't really have time to think about it, but looking back, I'm just not sure. My brain tells me it was just an animal or some other explainable thing, But when I go back home to visit and inevitably end up on or close to the reservation, it's always in the back of my mind. I went to a suicide as a coroner out in the middle of nowhere. Just me and the cops stood around the body bag under a little rain roof in a corner of a semi-trailer lot. It's raining, so we're all huddled under the canopy waiting for the funeral home, chatting about random stuff, when I hear footsteps crunching across the gravel coming towards us. I look over, thinking it's the funeral home or someone else, and there's nobody and nowhere anybody can hide. Well, that's weird, but maybe my mind heard the rain running off the roof and invented that sound or whatever. I believe in ghosts well enough, but I look for the obvious and explainable answers before making that leap, so I wasn't too concerned about it. Until it happened again, several footsteps got louder and closer in the gravel, but when I looked, nothing. Well, now I'm fully aware of this, and now I'm making sure I'm paying attention to the area where these sounds are coming from out of the corner of my eye. A minute or two later, I hear them again, and I see absolutely nobody or anything. It happened a total of about 4 to 5 times before the funeral home showed up, and we wrapped everything up and left. I closed up a church one night after a fundraising event. Everyone left except 4 men, who were outside. I checked under all the chairs, walked through rows, turned off the lights, and closed the doors. When I walked away, I heard a woman singing from inside. It was faint but started to get louder. I was so scared, so I booked it. Thankfully, the men came with me to check inside again. They actually chuckled when I told them about what happened, saying the ghost enjoys singing and is friendly. I drive a haul truck in a mine. One night I was driving with my trainer, I had just started. We went to turn the corner, and all of a sudden an animal jumped out and started crossing the highway. At first I thought coyote, but then I realized something was off to the point that it just creeped me out. It went over the berm and into the night before we could get close enough to identify it. A couple minutes later, it all clicked together as to why I was creeped out. The legs were too long. If anything, it kind of resembled a maned wolf. It was running, but each limb was moving independently. Every leg bent at a knee that went forward, like only the front leg should, and every movement was very exaggerated, akin to how a dog walks when you put bottles on it. I still haven't been able to identify it, but it gives me the creeps to think about it. After my dad retired, he went and got a night job as a security guy for a lumber mill near where they lived at the time. He said the creepiest night he had was one night in mid-January. He got there, clocked in, and the other guy had taken off for the night, so he was by himself. He said he stepped out and took about 3 steps, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. It took a minute to realize what the deal was, though, and he said he had a hard time figuring out what was spooking him because he didn't hear anything. Like, anything. At all. No little animal noises, things scurrying around, etc., just dead quiet. Dad's been around settings like that a lot over the years, so he instinctively took a big step backwards towards the door, which was a good thing because the female great horned owl missed him by about 6 inches. He never heard her coming. For those that don't know, that species of owl is an apex predator and pretty territorial. Picture a bird with a 5-foot wingspan, a bad attitude, and knives on its feet that eats mice, rats, possums, raccoons, foxes, cats, rabbits, other birds, and damn near anything else it wants to. Middle of a snowy night at a gas station. An old guy comes in, looks at me, walks down a few aisles, and then decides to go to the bathroom. I thought he was going in there to do drugs or something, but I didn't care. I used most of those hours to do homework. About 30 minutes passed, and I remember him still being in there. I get concerned and go check on him. We have a key to open the bathrooms from the outside if we need to, and I let him know I'm coming in. The guy was slumped over dead. He was suffering from hypothermia and tried to use our bathroom to warm up. The creepy part actually happened the next night. After the body was gone and paperwork was sorted out on what happened, the next night another old guy came in, and he stuck out to me because he was wearing the same color shirt and pants as the guy who died. And also looked somewhat like him. I know it wasn't a ghost because this guy went and grabbed some snacks and needed to pay for a pump. So I got him all rung up, and he asked if he could leave his stuff on the counter real quick to use the bathroom. I agree, and again, this guy has been gone for 30-ish minutes, so I go check on him. When I open the door, nobody was there, there were no snacks on the counter, nor was there any car by the pumps, just mine in the lot. It was probably my imagination, but I was home alone and playing video games with friends. I had just come home after hanging out with some buddies. My door was open, and the lights in the hallway were dimmed. From my chair, I could only see like 20 to 30% of the hallway because of my monitor. When I look forward, I look at the door, I swear to God I saw someone's head pass from right to left, leads into the living room, but it was not really tall. My heart was racing as I stood up and lit up the hallway, only to reveal it was no one. I just turned on the lights in my room and closed the door. I don't really believe in ghosts or paranormal stuff because I haven't had any proof, but this experience still kind of freaks me out considering it has never happened before. I could see the black pass on top and on the bottom of my monitor, which was weird. I have not seen it since then. Only once did it happen. One late night, I walked out to my balcony. I live on the 12th floor of an apartment building, and a super thick, dense fog had covered everything. Now, super dense fog by itself isn't too bad, but I live in a really big city, like the top 20 worldwide kind of big, and near zero visibility fog is not common here at all. I've never seen it so bad. It was Silent Hill-like. Also, it was oddly warm outside, despite being like 3 to 4 in the morning. So that was really weird and unsettling. It got worse when I started hearing screams, though. A scream that sounded like no or help, followed by a blood-curdling, someone is getting murdered level scream. I went back into my room, closed all the doors, drew the curtains, and turned off all the lights except for the one on my desk. Something like 20 to 30 minutes later, I decided to check outside. The fog was completely gone, 100% gone, and it was super cold out. Visibility was perfect, like there wasn't just pea soup thick fog literally less than half an hour ago. From what I found, fog doesn't vanish that quickly and usually forms when it's cold, so I have no idea what the hell happened there. I looked at the news the next day, nothing unusual was reported, though. So I also have no idea what the screaming was. I was in bed, about to close my eyes, when I heard a woman scream. Then gunshots. Then another scream, fainter this time. The scary thing wasn't the scream, but that I immediately knew it wasn't real. I don't know how I knew, but I just did. A few days later, I heard a gunshot, and this time I knew it was real. It was confirmed in the news later. A few days after that, I heard another scream and then someone calling my name and calling for help. Again, I knew it wasn't real. It would only happen at night. I started hearing arguments, crashes, motorbikes revving up, screams, footsteps, and all that shit, and I always knew that it wasn't real, but I don't know how or why it happened. It wasn't even like I was about to fall asleep. I'd be wide awake, and I'd hear something crash, like someone throwing a table down from a building, but I'd always know it wasn't real. 3 to 4 months later, it suddenly stopped and hasn't happened again. I was worried at the time that I was either losing my mind or that I had injured my brain in some way, but I never felt any pain, discomfort, or anything like that. Just the sounds. When I was a kid, I lived in a campground with my mom and her boyfriend. It had campers and tents and whatnot that were seasonal. Most people kept them there all year but moved in during the summer, and trailers in the back that people lived in year-round. It was pretty lame during the off-season, since I was so far out of town and couldn't really see other kids, but during the summer, we always had a bunch of different people come into camp, so I got to meet a lot of kids who were there for the summer. Of course, there were also some weirdos who came in for the season as well. I had heard from a friend who was camping there that an elderly couple had intentionally walked in on him showering in the public bathrooms multiple times and that they could be seen staring into people's windows at night. I didn't really pay it much mind, though, since scary rumors were pretty common out there. One night, I was about 8 or 9, I was lying on my bed watching TV and playing my DS at around midnight or 1 a.m. It was summer, so my window was open, and I hadn't bothered to close the blinds. The window was next to my bed, partially behind it, and I could hear leaves crunching outside. I assumed it was our cats, who were outside cats, or a fox or a coyote, so I ignored it. The noises stopped, so I kept on playing. At some point, I turned to look out my window or close my blinds, and I saw an older-looking man with his face practically pushed up against my window, smiling. I gasped loudly but didn't scream for some reason. I was in shock and just sort of staring at this guy, who wasn't moving or saying anything. Eventually I closed my blinds, shut off my TV and all the lights, and just hid under the covers. I don't know why I didn't get my mom's boyfriend to take care of this creep. I guess I was just in too much shock to really process it. I told them the next morning, but, thankfully, by that time, the campground owners had received multiple complaints throughout the night and had taken care of them. It was definitely one of the weirdest experiences I've had, even in such a weird place. I was chilling on the porch with my family, aunt, uncle, 2 kids, and myself, when I went inside to get a beer and saw something kid-sized or kid-shaped duck their head into the master bedroom. Thinking the little one is playing hide and seek, I go in to look, but no one is there. I go back outside and ask who was playing in the bedroom. My aunt says, "We've all been outside, "What's up?" So I tell her. She immediately tells the kids to go play because we need to have a grown-up only talk. She basically tells me that the house is haunted and to never talk about it and ignore it because they finally got the shadow people to chill out. This is coming from a career military family with a cut the bullshit attitude. No one believes us, but this happened 2 weeks ago. I was at my best friend's place, chilling with him and his girlfriend. We sat on his couch, listening to music. I told him I found a cool YouTube channel that does scary stuff. I'm a person who is easy to scare, which he finds funny. He has a balcony that has 2 doors. One through the kitchen, and one to the living room. One moment, he went to the kitchen to get us something to drink and some snacks. He tried to spook us and knocked heavily on the outside living room window. His girl and I got a bit scared, but we knew seconds later that it was him. He came back like nothing had happened. He tried to convince us that it wasn't him. Suddenly he started laughing, telling us we were gullible. In that moment, something knocked 3 times pretty hard on the living room door. We all were silent for a minute, realizing what had happened because he lives alone. I can't stop thinking about it. When I was a kid, I believed in ghosts. Heavily. To the point that I had a massive fear of the dark. One summer night, my brother dared me to sleep in the living room with him. There were no night lights down in the living room, which is why I was against it. Thinking I was a tough girl, I agreed to sleep in the living room with him. The way that house was, we had 3 couches. 2 of them were on either side of the room. Me and my brother slept on those, and one was at the other end of the room with a coffee table in front of it. My house was extremely small, so the distances weren't far at all. I'd say the living room was the size of a very small classroom. I wasn't having a good night. I kept tossing and turning and counting sheep. I managed to doze off for an hour, I think. I snapped awake and turned to face the room. That's when I saw it. There was a transparent little boy standing next to the coffee table that was in front of the 3rd couch. I was terrified. I could barely move. He was facing away from where I was. I went to hide under my blanket. When I looked back out, I saw the boy slowly turning around. He started to skip forward. I had now been fully under the covers and was peeking out. The boy went past me and disappeared into the wall. Seconds later, thousands of horrified faces of the boy appeared everywhere. I could even see them with my eyes closed. I'm not sure how long this went on. My child self was terrified. On the couch I was on, there was a light switch a little bit past the couch. After finally getting myself together just a little, I shot forward and turned on the light, and the minute that light, it was a hallway light, turned on, all the faces disappeared. My mom had seen the light turn on, she was a light sleeper, and came out to see me absolutely terrified. After that, I never went to sleep in the living room again, and I couldn't sleep for about a month. I've seen a total of 2 ghosts in that house, this was one of them. And because of this, I still have a fear of the dark. I'm not a night guard, but I was a janitor a little while ago in a building that was only accessible by a key fob. You'd need one to get into the front door, and you'd have to use it again to enter the offices. The shift was from 4 p.m. to midnight, and if I finished early, I got to leave while still being paid until midnight. Each night I'd hang out with my coworkers in the office until 5 p.m., then we'd all head out to our buildings. I'd empty all the trash bins first, vacuum and mop where needed, take care of any scheduled cleanings like steam cleaning the curtains, and hit the bathrooms last since everyone would normally be out of the office at that time. Most nights, I was finished between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. There was a night when I was finishing up, and all I had to do was clean the bathrooms. I did the women's room without any issues, and then I headed into the men's room. When I went in, the lights turned on because of that sensor, and there was some man I had never seen before just standing in the middle of the bathroom. I have no idea who he was or how long he was in there, but he had to have stood still long enough for the lights to go off and then remain motionless so they wouldn't turn back on. When I saw him, I just turned around and left for the night. I used to work at a family entertainment center that included a laser tag facility, an arcade, and other family-friendly things. One night, 2 of our regulars were at the facility for their bowling league. Their kids wanted to play laser tag. I don't remember their exact ages, but at the time I'd say the girl was about 5 or 6, and the boy was probably 7 or 8. Just the 2 of them asked if I'd play too. I agreed, and we went into the arena to play. Midway through the game, the girl pops the corner, and I notice her vest is turned off, which can't happen unless it's done by the computer in the office. Then the music stops, so of course I flip SHT and think the lights are going next. I was so sure someone was in the office who wasn't supposed to be. I ran out, threw the office door open, and the computer crashed. Never happened before. I called the kids in to reset the game, and the little girl says she's scared and doesn't want to play again. I told them okay and that I would refund their parents. I was helping her get the laser tag vest off when she said, "Hey, I have a question." I asked what it was, and she said, "Who was the man in there playing with us?" There was no man in there, it was just me, 19F, at the time and the kids. I told her there wasn't anyone else in there, and she said yes, there was, and she could show me. She grabs my hand, walks me to the door and opens it, points up on the ramp, and says, "See him right there." I told her I didn't see anything, and she goes, "How can you not see him? His hair is glowing." I used to work in a mental health hospital, working 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. We had 2 night watch people, one watching the many infrared and daytime cameras, and one on the floor. We had a patient come in before dinner who was put on suicide watch and required a one-on-one at all times when behind closed doors, so I basically had to watch him sleep. He was a very reserved gentleman, tall and broad, with piercing green eyes that seemed full of resentment. He didn't say much and walked very slowly at all times. It was about 9 p.m. when he quietly walked over to the nurse's station and asked for his nighttime meds, then headed over to his room with me in tow. I grabbed a chair and a book and watched him make up his bed and eventually turn off the lights before crawling in. I placed my chair in the faint corridor of light coming from the common area, separating it from the complete darkness of his bed, only able to hear him. As he crawled into bed and situated himself for a moment before the room fell silent, I dove into my book, keeping an ear in his direction. About 45 minutes into my book, I heard him situate himself again, eventually settling. I shot a glance in his direction, straining my eyes to adjust to the overwhelming darkness, but was still unable to see anything. After quite a bit of time had passed without as much as a peep, I got the familiar chirp of my colleague on the radio in my ear, sensing immediately an uneasiness in his voice. Boy Panda?" Whispering, "Yay? You do realize he's been staring at you for the better part of an hour, right?" I'm a security guard for a distribution warehouse in a rural area. We're on site 24/7, even when the warehouse personnel leave for the night. Once they're gone, whatever guard is there is the only human around for miles. Now, we're stationed in this little guard shack at the front of the truckers area. It's your standard shack, the front and back have large glass windows. The sides have sliding glass doors. On the nights I've worked there, it gets downright creepy. Nothing moved except for the occasional rabbit or deer. You'll hear a coyote howl every once in a while. And almost every night the fog rolls in. It creeps over the hill and slithers down, almost like a living thing. Your imagination can run wild at times, those bits of fog in the front start to look like tendrils seeking out prey. But that's not the creepy thing, that's expected. What's creepy is when you're sitting there, all alone except for the animals. And you see someone walk past you in the reflection off the glass, knowing you're supposed to be the only person within miles of the place. So you spin around, only to find there's no one behind you. You race to the window to see if they're past the shack, no one's there. Then you check the recordings, no one shows up on them either. While it's not an every night thing, it happens enough that all of the guards have experienced it at one point or another. And it's not a reflection of animals moving, the gate is wrong, and the colors aren't animal colors. In the 90s, I worked for a few months in western Angola as part of a crew opening mass graves. I guess that counts. One of the graves was outside an abandoned village, and in it we found over 500 bodies. Usually, we found a few, maybe half a dozen men. Here we found women, children, and babies. They'd been in the ground for maybe 6 months. There were only bones and clothes. We didn't exhume the bodies, the goal was to make a census. So after we counted the skulls, we closed the grave back up. Our trucks were on the other side of the village, and so I was walking back with my crew through the village, which wasn't burned like it usually was, just empty, and suddenly there was a little boy standing in the road in front of us. Maybe 2 years old. No one saw where he came from, but he stood there and stared at us with his large eyes. We stopped because there was no way a child was still alive in this place. The fields were dead and overgrown, there was not another living being for hundreds of miles around. Angola is a huge country and got very empty in those decades of civil war. The kid stood there, then turned and walked away, into one of the huts. We went in after him but could not find him, and though we searched the whole place for maybe an hour after, we could not find him. It got dark, and we drove back to the town where we were camped. To this day, I don't know whether the kid had some hiding place or not, whether he was a ghost, or how on earth he survived. I was driving a plow. We were at a graveyard during the graveyard shift. It was about 11 p.m. when we finished up the work. The other driver texted me, saying to go back to the upper lot. AKA, he needed to pee. We drove back up. It was about 15 minutes later that we heard what sounded like a vehicle trying to go up the hill. Both of us looked at each other and said, "Nah," like we were seeing things. It's been a long day. We were both determined to be imagining things. Got back in the truck to head out. He left. When I was about to leave, an old hearse came driving in. They were in front of the exit. A person got out and came to my window. Thinking it was the other guy coming back, I put it down and saw it wasn't him. I saw what looked like a younger lady in makeup wearing all black. I rolled my window down and put my hand out. It said, "Stop, I'm real." We both nervously laughed. She asked if I had the roads cleaned, and when I said yes, she yelled something, and other people also dressed in black walked around with lanterns, singing and doing chants. When they were about to go, we kind of waved at each other and left. The scary part of it was when they said they'd lock me up. They actually did have a key to lock up the cemetery. I used to work graveyard shifts for Angolan and was a dispatcher who sat in the office and told everyone where to go when calls came in. Well, one night I was sitting at the front desk after I had locked up the building and made sure everyone was out. I was browsing Reddit when, all of a sudden, the elevator started coming down. The door opened, and no one was there. I kind of sat there staring at it for a few minutes, and then it closed and went back up. Once it got back up, I heard footsteps, and one of the doors leading to the offices opened and closed. Since I am basically security, I had to go check it out to make sure no one was up there. I walked in, and the room felt odd. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood up, and it felt rather cold compared to the rest of the building. I heard tapping on one of the locked office doors, and then when I shined my flashlight at it, it stopped. It then started on the window behind me. I heard a growl come from the room next to me and then a loud bang on one of the doors. It was hard enough to shake the door in the frame and rattle the little window. At this point, I boarded the Nope train to Duckfatterton and zipped out of the offices. I don't think I've gone into the offices in like 7 or 8 months. Duck that. I didn't routinely work at night, but I was project managing some renovation work at my office, which was once an old factory over several floors. There are long-standing rumors about the former owner's wife hanging herself and wandering about down one end after the fact, but with old Victorian factories, I imagine a lot of misery and harm took place there fairly routinely. During the renovations, I had to wait in the building long after everyone had left as the electrician couldn't come in while staff were there, then wanted to have his dinner and such, so he wouldn't arrive until after 8 p.m. and then wouldn't finish until 11 p.m., when I'd have to lock up. The place was eerie anyway, run down with original windows that creaked and leaked. Most of the workspace ran along the length of the building and across its full width, so to close at one entrance, you had to walk all the way back through the building to turn off the lights and then walk back in the dark. Every night while I waited, I'd hear what sounded like people pushing chairs back from desks, the chair legs clanking against the tables as they stood. The first time, I thought someone must have been on the floor and I just hadn't realized, but there was no one there. What's more, all the chairs were standard office chairs with plastic star bases and wheels. None of them were metal or made any kind of similar noise. So, I concluded it must be the company on the ground floor, as they had small machinery. Nope. They'd all left and locked up. Besides, I'd never heard their kit going in all the time I'd worked there, and they started before us, while I was usually first or second in. I couldn't work out what it was, but there was always a sense of the main office being busy. It felt like there was just work going on in there, even after hours. Then, one night, after 11 p.m., I was closing up and walking back through the building in the dark when I heard a door behind me open. I'd checked the place, there was nobody there, and every single door required a security pass to get through. I didn't look back, I got my shit and locked up as fast as I ducking could. The next night, I thought, I'll just ask the electrician to wait for me while I lock up. Ducker left before I had a chance. I could have cried. I was working at the local library, and this guy at one of the computers waved me over to him. Thinking he needed help with the computer, I obliged and headed over. The guy is about 410, has a frizzy afro, black sunglasses, and wears a tan duster that he has modified to have dozens of small pockets on the inside flaps of his coat. We get a lot of homeless people in the library, so I assumed he was a derelict. The guy shows me a distorted picture of a planet on his computer, as if it were taken from a deep space telescope or something. He tells me that's his homeworld and that it's called Erasmus. Curious, I begin to ask him questions about faster than light travel, and he quietly tells me that you're not ready to talk about that yet. Then he promptly gets up and leaves the library. I watch him cross 4 lanes of traffic, stand on a raised divider, pick up a small stone from the ground, and carefully put the rock into one of his many pockets. He walked around the corner, and I never saw him again. The guy had a really benevolent vibe to him and acted so strangely that I almost wanted to believe he was really an alien. During my time as a sheriff's deputy, I worked as a night guard for a local branch of a massive investment firm for extra cash and worked the 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. shift on weekends. There were only 2 guards on shift at any time, and because it was a financial building, they allowed those of us certified to be armed if we had the certificates. The facility was 3 buildings across a 4-acre property, was gated, and was on the tail end of an industrial park, on the border of a really rough neighborhood where break-ins and shootings were not uncommon. One night I was on guard during December. A lot of the desks were covered in Christmas decorations and wrapping paper, and a lot of the employees would leave little treats and bowls of candy out for us to thank us for being there for them. We all really appreciated it, and it helped take our minds off of the long hours while we were there alone, and it reminded us of why we did it. That particular night, the other guard I was with was a fellow soldier with me in the National Guard, so we both knew we were trained and had each other's backs, which put me pretty at ease as I walked down the long, dark, empty hallways with my flashlight. Suddenly my radio lit up, and my buddy tells me the cameras in one of the cubicle areas were feeding black, and he thinks the lights went out, and my job was to walk over there and reset the breaker and get the lights back on. I turned around and began to walk down the hallway. It was absolutely pitch black, there were no service lights, no door lights, no faint glow of computers left on, nothing. The air felt cold, my flashlight felt darker than normal, and something wasn't right. My heartbeat began to speed up as I remembered that the breaker room was all the way in the back, near the server, and I had to walk down nearly 40 rows of cubicles to get there. I listened carefully in case it was someone or something that caused it, and I kept hearing this odd clicking sound as I began to slowly walk through the cubicle row. Suddenly, I saw a silhouette crouched down between 2 cubicles in the back. I knelt down and drew my gun, thinking I caught someone in the building. I pinged the radio twice to signal my buddy to get 911 on standby, and I began to slowly walk towards it, issuing verbal commands. "Stand up and face me now," I yelled at the silhouette, wondering why it wasn't moving. As my flashlight hit it, it was a goddamned clown statue holding a Charlie Brown Christmas tree. I laughed and holstered my gun. My hands were shaking, I was sweaty, and I was genuinely happy I didn't have to use force or possibly take a life that night. I felt so relieved. I walked up to it, planning to move it back inside a cubicle to get it out of our way. Suddenly the little ducker lit up. Bah ha ha ha, it laughed, loudly and sharply. I took off running like a little witch. The thing absolutely caught me off guard and scared the living shite out of me. I've caught bums in our dumpster, cracked heads on our roof, and we even had multiple shootings in the apartments nearby. Nothing scared me as much as that ducking clown laughing at me. Eyes and nose glowing red. I ran all the way back to the front desk and made my buddy get the lights in there. I'm not even scared of clowns normally, but that one in particular would continue to creep me out for the rest of the time I worked there. Duck that clown. I live in a desert area. Just the other night, probably around 2 or 3 a.m., I found a tarantula in our family's kitchen when I went to get a snack. Now, I'm generally a brave person, but spiders scare the shite out of me, and this was a ducking mammoth spider. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want to wake anyone up, so I just left it there and went back to my room on the other side of the house. I didn't tell anyone in my family about it, they aren't really dangerous to humans anyways, and no one in my family has reported seeing a giant spider, so I just want to assume that I got out the way it came in, but I've definitely been getting a little paranoid about leaving my room at night. November 2019. I stayed up all night to watch the Friends series on Netflix. My uncle and brother were sleeping in their own rooms, each of us has our own room. Our sofa is an L-shape set in the corner of the living room. Behind one of its sides is the wall, and behind the other is our window. And I was lying down on the sofa with the window behind me, so the fear of someone looking at me through the window was present that night. At exactly 12 a.m., I heard something behind me. Something like the deep giggle antagonists do in movies when they hear absurd things. My neck froze, and I was ready to run. I couldn't look behind me since I'm a scaredy cat. I paused what I was watching on TV and listened very carefully. After about 10 seconds of steadiness and being alert, I heard it again. It's like an evil laugh, but it just hums, and it is very, very deep. I could imagine a bloody man sitting behind me, leaning his face to the window, and just smiling with wide eyes while making this creepy sound. Then it stopped again. I couldn't do anything. All I have is the remote in my hands, so I felt really helpless. After what felt like hours of silence, I heard a breath on my window, behind my neck. I ran to the hallway leading to my uncle's room and banged on the door to wake him up. As I was panicking in front of his door, I gazed out the window, and what I saw has haunted me until now. I saw a very dirty man with long, frizzy black hair going down to his ribs. He looked like the jackal from the 13 Ghosts horror movie, but his eyes were very red, his teeth were dirty, and he seemed to be broken, like some jagged weapon inside your mouth. I don't know if that's a homeless person or a demon, but I was just so happy my uncle opened his door. I was working day shift on a drilling rig in the middle of nowhere. The rig manager comes to me and tells me I have to switch to nights on boiler watch to supervise the new guy and make sure all the assigned tasks are completed. Apparently he failed to complete his shit list the night before. So now I'm on nights. I work with this kid, and he seems good. A guy with a solid work ethic. I can't understand why he failed the previous night. We completed all the work inside, and now it was time to go get a few things done outside. I tell him, let's get after oiling that loader, and he tells me that he can't work outside in the dark. I kind of laugh and say we are definitely going to go do that oil change. He is scared. Real fear. I ask him why, and he tells me. Keep in mind that the rig is in the middle of nowhere. Hours to the closest small town out in the bush. His story went like this. He had done everything asked of him inside and went and started working out of the buildings on the lease outside. He got hungry, so he grabbed his lunch. He left an apple on the hood of the truck and walked away for a few minutes. When he came back, the apple was still on the hood of the truck, but there was now a bite out of it. He looked on the ground, and there were human shoe prints leading out of the trees, to the truck, and back into the trees. We are in the middle of nowhere, and there is no way someone should be out there in the bush in that temperature at that time of night. So I started thinking. That means somebody was watching him from the darkness of the trees and took the time to mess with him. This person is either the funniest guy alive or a super strange bushman. Looking at where we were, the chances of him being the funniest guy ever were very slim. So now we have a strange man in the bush watching us. As a 64, 260-pound man, I'm weirded right out by this story. I sent a shiver up my spine when I realized how that must have gone down. We went, and the footprints were still there. We changed the oil, but we both had pipe wrenches as weapons in case we had a visitor. It still creeps me out to this day.